Hi, Abby.
Hello.
Today is our second day of Portal Talks 2024. We have a great day coming up, starting with Abby from Syntasso slash Cradix with two peas in a pod, portal and platform. Hope she confuses us or doesn't confuse us. So that's that. So she's going to talk about how good interfaces make for good operability. After that, we have Adriana and Anna talking about onboarding, developer onboarding with platform engineering. We have internal developer portal for AppSec. We have Lou Bichard talking about how to launch and not launch portals. And then we have infrastructure made easy with Upbound with Javid, who's going to talk from Upbound. And Abby, the floor is yours. First of all, introduce yourself so we get to know who you are, and then share the slides. And I will be moderating in the background if anybody wants to ask questions. And one last thing, we will send recordings of everything. We're going to put everything on YouTube, so no worries there.
Yeah, fantastic. I was enjoying that they were already up from yesterday because I had a spotty availability yesterday, so I was able to catch up on some things I missed. It's been an awesome first day of content, and I'm hoping this is the first of many editions of Portal Talks, given what the content has been to date. But so I'm honored to be here to open up. My name is Abby Bangser. I work for Syntasso, and we build Cradix, as Ronnie said. I am involved in a lot of community work, including as a CNCF ambassador and co-lead of the working group, as well as a team topologies advocate. And basically, I just have a huge interest in helping my peer developers and internal organizations run more smoothly. That's something I've been doing basically all of my career. And so, as Ronnie introduced, we are going to be talking about portals and platforms today, but with a really big focus on the operability side of things here. So I had my whole talk, it was all ready to go, and I actually wound up introducing a bit of a detour here that may feel about as wonky as this AI generated detour image, but I thought it would warm us up a little bit given what crazy hour some of you might be joining us from in the US. And this detour is a story about a couple days ago when I got invited to my to drinks at a former employer's offices. It was great. I got to catch up with some friends. I got to meet some of the new employees, and it was just all around a really nice time, which I find is often the case with these kinds of events. What you talk about at these events can range, I'm sure. The weather. I do live in London. I should caveat that the weather is always a topic. This week, Euros again. Caveat: I live in London, so talking about I should call it football and soccer is always a big topic. But also the most common topic in these kinds of meetings is around and like social events is around the technology decisions that existed while you were at the company, that you made while you were at the company, and that people may still want to roast you or inform you about afterwards. And this was no different. After some nice social time, we ended up talking about a decision that I thought would leave me infamous. You see, when I was there, we had started in a world where we had fortnightly releases. It took us 2 weeks and a couple of developers' time during those 2 weeks to take code from release branches and put it into production. And it often resulted in a fairly high overhead of managing those releases and managing any hot fixes and everything else. And we had a intention to go to continuous delivery where we could release on demand when we wanted to from trunk. So we would reduce the overhead of maintenance on both the release process as well as on the maintenance of production. In some ways, this should be easy, right? You just change where your deployment runs from, not the branch on trunk. But actually, there's a lot of buy in that you need. And when the platform team was having a conversation about this, we were trying to think through what the challenges would be. One of the big challenges that we hadn't expected going in, but that hit us the hardest, was the fact that our code bases were split by technology decision. So we had a code base for Terraform that managed infrastructure. We had a code base for applications that managed like the different languages and different apps that we had. And we had a code base for Ansible, which was the configuration that kind of pulled those two together and made everything work. The reality was that we had changes across all three repos that had to go to production at the same time. So if all of a sudden we were releasing from trunk, which trunk? Was it when we made a change to the infrastructure or the software? What happens if we need to do both? And there's all sorts of software techniques that we could have used in the way of expand and contract to make that possible across repositories. But we realized that the way to make this safer, which was one of the key deliverables we were aiming for in this piece of work, we needed to think about making this a single repository that was kind of domain focused from infrastructure through to software on deploy. Challenge here is that the platform team was pretty software oriented and had spent a lot of time factoring out their code, including Ansible tasks that were shared across many different software domains. So all of a sudden we had a problem. Where do those live? Do we put them in each of these domain repos, or do we keep them separate? And the team's first instinct was to package those up, version control them, pull them in, make it a true kind of dependency model there. But quickly, as we were talking about this, we were realizing this wasn't going to be days or weeks of effort. It was probably weeks or months. And we just had to press the brakes real quick. Like, was refactoring this code actually the value that we were trying to provide? Or was it making those releases safer because we would be able to use hot fixes without trying to cherry pick across, and faster because instead of releasing things once a fortnight, we could do it whenever we had value to provide? And obviously more efficient because the release process would be completely through the CI/CD server rather than on this kind of fortnightly release train process. This is where I come in with the infamous comment. I said, well, what if, hear me out, we just copy and paste all of Ansible across the 3 different repos that we needed it, where we have the shared code? Problem. And while we're on Zoom and I can't see your faces, I can definitely imagine them because the aghast look from my colleagues still sticks with me to this day. There's nothing good about this, right? Don't repeat yourself is absolutely being ruined by this idea. And the idea of drift and bit rot is a massive risk. But once everyone took a deep breath, had some water, we had a chat, and the reality was that we had an opportunity to intentionally commit and commit to tech debt so that we could get value out the door and that we could fill in that and pay down that debt very quickly. We trusted our team to build the time into our process for that. And it was all good because actually, when we made that decision, we moved forward, just copy and paste Ansible across indiscriminately these 3 repos. We were able to go from getting buy-in from leadership team through to buy-in and trust from the software developers who had to build and maintain this build process, through to coaching the impacted other parties in our organization, such as marketing and customer service, to this new way of releasing. In 4 months, we went from doing fortnightly releases to doing on-demand releases from trunk. So that is a success story as long as you pay down the tech debt. And I was with the company for about 9 months after we completed that piece of work, and we did pay down the tech debt. We had fantastic CI/CD, so we were able to just start kind of mass deleting Ansible that was unnecessary in different repos and catch ourselves if there was a problem as a part of that release process. And we got to the point of a set amount of overlap. We introduced a way to catch ourselves if we were to make drift. So we introduced a CI/CD pipeline stage that would check if any of those tasks had changed and warn the committer that it changed. And that was something that, as a human, if I got that warning, it was important that I take care of the business to go off and update that everywhere, or remove that from a shared list because it's no longer shared between the repositories. But the coming back to these drinks this week, I was like, head in hand, how are we feeling? How are we feeling about that Ansible's being copied across the repos? How are we doing? And one of the newest employees was like, wait, what? Oh, you mean that check tasks job? What? It's fine. And there was just like no big deal, because actually the business value delivered from being able to get faster, safer, more efficient deploys has so outweighed any onboarding costs for understanding that warning in your CI/CD pipeline that the platform team has to worry about, and any costs of doing those multiple updates across the Ansible repos, because the rate of change was just so small on those. And that was part of our hypothesis and reason that we thought this change would be okay. But this is the thing: is this software that we write and we run is a lot more about this operability and long-term commitment to it than short-term. And that's why I want to talk today about platform engineering and that operability side of things within platforms and portals. And so a few things that I hope that you'll take away from this talk is the fact that platform engineering will rise and fall on whether or not it delivers business value. It really needs to focus on that. That this conversation about platforms versus portals is not the right way to be looking at anything. It never has been, and it will not be in the future either. And thankfully, I think we're evolving past that, but it's a conversation we still need to hammer home. And finally, I want to think about operability in depth and think about it not just from the traditional ops point of view, but from a few other aspects, including the usability of that software, the extensibility of it, and the maintainability of it, as those three characteristics, in my opinion, come together to create the operability of the software. So I'm speaking at a conference, which means I can get away with saying sweeping statements like the success of platform engineering depends on delivering business value. These are the kinds of things that you can get away with. But I also am more frequently on the other side of these conference talks, and I can accept just how frustrating something like this is to hear. Because what does that really mean? So while I believe in this statement, I want to jump straight to some examples that I think will help highlight this. And these examples come from my work over the last few years at different companies. I've been a consultant. I work with the CNCF working group. And these are the companies I'm talking to today, yesterday, and around. So the first example is around a big focus on speed to market. This is where companies are thinking about how do I bring value to customers and how do I compete with the ever changing landscape of startups and fast moving competitors. A really good example of this was actually shared at Platform Engineering Day in Paris at the CNCF KubeCon conference. NatWest spoke about how they have focused on that speed to market aspect and have taken their speed to market down from months to minutes by being able to focus on that business value of how do we get new features and new ideas out into the market to test them and get value from them. Next one is around that percentage of the work that you're getting business value from, revenue generating value from. We all know that there is certain work you need to do to keep the lights on, but what percentage of your time is spent doing that and what percentage is spent on revenue? One really good example of this is when there are organizations that manage software for their customers. I was speaking to a company just recently who has tenants and they actually run the software for their customers. They had automation around all these tenants, of course, like it is 2024. But that automation was done still in a fairly disparate way. It was running the automation in one repository and then another in different environments and tenants. Being able to track the versions in these different environments, being able to track the state of those environments was getting more and more difficult as the company was getting more and more successful. And they were realizing that the cost of time just to keep their tenants running was eating into the ability for them to deliver value to these new customers, which was extremely important at the stage company they're at. And so what they wanted to focus on was how do we reduce that overhead cost and get back to revenue generating value for our customers. Another example is around the cost to scale cross-functional requirements. I think it was quite controversial when Kelsey Hightower at PlatformCon this year said that silos may not be the worst thing, but I have to say I agree with him. It's not that skills living within a single person or team is a bad thing inherently. It's whether or not those skills and those silos have doors and windows and abilities to interact with each other and gain access that is so key. And this was something that was talked about by DKB with Stefan, who talked about the need to take those expensive skill sets like DBA and even platform engineer and security engineer and finance, focused and individuals. And how do you scale them? We can't have a DBA on every team that makes a SQL query, right? So how do we take those skills and we push those out to the team so they can make sensible and fair solutions? The last one I'll talk about is risk mitigation, and specifically here about the repeatability and measurability of disaster recovery. We all have our backups and we all test our backups, right? The thing is that I was having a conversation with a financial institution that actually has regulatory requirements to test and validate their disaster recovery process on the regular and report about it. And they're great, and as a technology department they pass this test, they're able to do it, but they're not really content, because the reality of their business and their market is that they have manual steps and a lot of parallel steps and dependencies that are sometimes hard to track and trace. So while they can manage this disaster recovery, it's not always comfortable knowing exactly when it will complete or how long it will take, and it's not super repeatable. And so they want to gain confidence and reduce that risk of, well, what happens if disaster hits at the wrong time when we're not in a test phase? And so they want to invest in that. One thing that you might be missing from these four examples is that I never talked about technology. I never talked about the technology that the companies use to be able to solve these problems. I never talked about a technology that these companies depend on for their businesses and that the platform is servicing. Because the thing is that it is independent of technology. The four stories I told today could easily have been told about pretty much any company in the world. These are these are key business requirements across the industry and across the world. And this focus on business first from a platform engineering point of view, or business value first, isn't new. The CNCF platform's white paper was released a couple of years ago, and it focused on this as well. The why platform section was the first section of the paper, and it started with 5 key points that businesses could expect to achieve if they were investing in and getting value from their platform engineering efforts. In here, we talk about that accelerated product development, that speed to market. We talk about reliability and resiliency, that reduced cost to be able to still support SLAs. We talk about reusing and sharing tooling, so that ability to share your knowledge and expertise across the organization in a standard way. We talk about reducing risk with security and regulatory requirements. And we talk about the fact that at the end of the day, the business is looking for a cost value on everything that they do. And so what we're looking for is this platform to manage that. This white paper is a, a document that has been used now for almost 2 years and has been used at the highest levels. I've heard about it going to C-level conversations on the regular, and it's often at very least in that director VP kind of level conversation. And yet, this opening gamut of talking about business first is wildly overshadowed in the amount of mentions to the last bit of the paper, which is talking about technical capabilities. That last section of the paper speaks to the capabilities along with a detailed list of potential capabilities and this diagram. This diagram talks about detailed implementation, including what types of interfaces you may want to use, what types of capabilities you might want to talk about between databases and caches and CI/CD and things like that are implied. Now, this diagram has some greatness to it, right? It's why it is being quoted in its same way, but we have to realize that one of the biases of the CNCF group and organization is technology. It was born from Kubernetes as a foundation, and that is where we live. So how can we aim to do better? I mean, I was a contributing member of this paper. I am now a co-lead of that group. And I just feel like when I listen to Gregor Hope, I feel like he's holding a mirror up to me and to the whole industry about our weakness in always thinking from a technology point of view. One of his most famous recent things that he talks about is the idea of naming things when it comes to abstractions. An automobile, you are mobile in an automatic way. Automobile is a way of encapsulating the value that that device provides. But if software engineers were able to name this, wouldn't it be called a combination of its parts? Who hasn't named a class something like the piston crankshaft gear wheel assembly before, right? This is just a reality in writing code. So if you haven't checked out Gregor Hope's work, he's just recently released a new book, self-published, and you should check that out as well as this talk, which is where the QR code goes to. The thing about software engineers is we may not always get it right, but we are always learning. And that is true also of the CNCF working group. That group continuously interrogates both ourselves and the industry to learn more and get better. And what I'm proud to say is that this is exactly the track we're moving on. And Julio from Mia Platform has been pushing this forward with some amazing work, including a blog post that's about to be published. So the QR code goes to a pull request, but you'll get the content there. This blog post interrogates the idea of platform plus plus and the idea that a platform needs to have a higher level abstraction, and proposes a diagram more closely related to the one here on the screen to indicate the level of abstraction that we should be talking about. We should be talking about those high level use cases for application developers down to those low level inputs of infrastructure and hyperscalers. But in the middle, let's step away from the implementation and towards the outcomes we're delivering. We need to allow for interactions of humans, but also machines and AI as that's growing. We need to think about use cases that are about a life cycle and not just about a specific technology, but creating and updating things and working with things and operating them. And this is something that we are encouraging a lot of conversation around right now. So this is an unabashed sales pitch to please come join the CNCF Platforms working group. It's a diverse group from around the world, all different organizations. We'd love to see you come and get involved in this conversation. But I am a technologist first and foremost, and I do think sometimes in that piston crankshaft kind of way. So, how do we go from these high level business aspects down to the implementation without jumping to implementation quickly? Well, we can take a small pit stop in the ways of the capabilities that we want this technology to provide. For example, we look across all these business cases and we realize that what we're looking for is optimization and empowerment, providing self-service ability to the different things that your employees need will allow them to move to market faster, will allow them to optimize their own work and risk mitigate themselves. And that not all users are the same. Some of these users are auditors, some are software developers, some are possibly marketing team members or data scientists. We need self-service as a first-class concern for all of our employees. We can also think about the fact that most of these are talking about a full life cycle of things. So yes, we talk about speed to market as how do I get from A to B? How do I create something? But the whole risk of going fast to market is that POC becomes production. How can we set people up for getting to market quickly and able to continue to iterate in that space effectively and with power, right? And the rest of these use cases are talking about things that are more in the later life cycles of software. We need to be building with full life cycle in mind. Finally, one of the big things here is that conversation around silos. How can we enable cross collaboration across the different skill sets in our organization to empower everyone to impact and bring value to all of our solutions that we make? We make things secure, we make them cost efficient, we make them green in the way that we do our solutions. We take those expertise and we build them in across our org. So, can platform engineering do this? Can platform engineering bridge that gap between those business requirements, those high level technical requirements, and then down to implementation? I think the answer is yes. I think platform engineering is an evolution in how we do implementation of internal tooling that is going to enable us to do this. So one thing that's worth looking at is why platform engineering can help. One of the things that's come out recently is this Gartner hype cycle, and we can see in it that it's not just sorry, this image came up a bit early, that the platform engineering is not just a rename of DevOps. It does engage a lot of the same techniques as DevOps because we're talking about building and running software internally. But what it is a pendulum swing that takes the complexity away from the nodes, away from the individual teams and people, and enables those to operate at a higher level of abstraction by pulling that in to a more centralized operations. But that idea of build and run isn't going away. The platform is not going to go back, I hope, to the world of one person runs the platform, one person builds their software on top of it. It's that the the platform itself is built and run, and that the platform builders are responsible for the usability and the value of that platform from uh, the whole spectrum from beginning to end, including live and production, just as the software engineers are responsible from building and running their software on top of that platform. In addition, there is that platform engineering focuses on the socio-technical challenges. And this is where that Gartner hype cycle should have showed up. Apologies, but the hype cycle does show that there is a socio-technical aspect of platform engineering that is widely understood. We see on that hype cycle, if I go back to it really quick, we see on this hype cycle that we have developer experience and we have team topologies on this cycle. These are things that are maybe odd to be on a technology document along with things like observability and secure supply chain, but actually it shows just how wide an impact platform engineering can have. The final thing that I would bring up is that platform engineering is at a unique place because it is building on industry improvements of recent. The reason why I don't think that this is going to be a return back to old school ops is because the industry has moved on. It's introduced better tooling, better techniques, and better expectations of software. And that is why we're seeing platform engineering get a second wind with a wider set of the market today, despite the fact that there were industry leaders using the term and using the techniques around platform engineering for many, many years, decades even, because platforms, as I think I've heard many people say yesterday, are not new. They're just getting a new second wind of popularity. But to get platform engineering to the point where it gets us this value, we have to get out of this technology first mindset where we are competing for visibility in the market. When I type in internal developer, it's your first two responses are platform and portal, right? IDP, those three little words. Ronnie was right to say, will I confuse you more or will I help? Well, I'm going to help by saying it doesn't matter. What we care about is the business outcomes. And it doesn't matter if you're working on a platform or a portal or both, because what's going to make either one of those or both of them together successful in the long term is a focus on business value, not on technology. So let's step away from the competing and work together. So here's where I get to make that early story actually make sense in this conference talk, because here's my journey at this company. I pop in for my tenure at the company. I work on a CD project along other things, and I go for beers a bit later. The reality is that company's been running for multiple decades. I was but a blip in the history of that company. I had things that I thought were absolutely ridiculous decisions by the technologists who came before me. And I am certain that while I got out, seems without too much recourse on my decision around Ansible, there's plenty of other things that people are cursing my name for there. We are but a blip in technology, and we need to be building for longevity. So what builds us and gets us to that longevity? What gets us there is operability and longevity and growth. So this isn't just going into maintenance mode, but getting that ongoing value generation that keeps people coming back, customers coming back, and the company's growing. I made the case in my takeaway slide that there are three aspects to operability that I think work together: maintainability, extensibility, and usability. Maintainability is obvious. It's easy. Everyone probably already agrees with me on this. BAU, business as usual, or keeping the lights on. This is things you might call maintainability. What are the activities that you do, like upgrading and security patching, to be able to keep that service going? And if you don't do this well, you may have an impact on the reliability of your service. Extensibility, maybe also something that people are pretty quick to connect to operability, but maybe not quite as same, because it's, maintainability is traditional ops. So extensibility brings in that build and run aspect. Are you able to add new features and or new users or new user profiles? And what are you able to do to build in that network effect to enable your users to actually drive adoption by engaging with the platform and pulling in other people instead of it being a push based kind of sale to get that product being used and that platform being used? And this can really affect whether or not you're able to have product growth, because if you're not able to add features, if you're not able to introduce new user journeys into your platform, you're going to struggle to continue to grow and to get adoption. The last one, this is the one I think people may not attribute to operability as much as they should. With usability, this one is often not connected because it's the only one that isn't felt directly by the people who actually create the platform or create the software that needs to be operated. But that usability affects your adoption and support costs. How much does it take to get somebody to want to use your software and to do so successfully? And how much does it take to be able to maintain their use of that software over time? These kinds of costs can add up and really take to that bottom line business case we spoke about before around what percentage of your time are you spending on revenue generating or value generating aspects of your software. We're seeing today that there's in the industry that there's plenty of layoffs when there's a perception that there's too much effort being put towards maintenance and not getting enough value for the work being put in. When you can shift the conversation from a high cost team to a high value team by making usability strong, all of a sudden your operations and your operability goes up. So I'm going to start with the usability in part because we're here at Portal Talks where usability is a core tenet of what we all care about, in part because it's probably the most controversial. And again, I think usability here is the unsung hero of operability. I spoke about this with Whitney Lee at Platform Engineering Day in Paris, where we talked about the fact that usability actually has no one answer. There's not just the usable piece of software. In reality, when we talk about platforms, we talk about where people expect to find solutions. Do they want to talk to someone else or do they want full autonomy? Do they need to change windows or applications to get access to something, or is it right in front of them, right at their fingertips? Do they care about the underlying capability they're using or just the capability benefit that they need? And do they want to be able to use advanced power user aspects of an interface, or do they just want things nice and simple? These are the things that actually create usability, and picking the wrong set on this scale can create a huge operational overhead. And we talked about portals in this talk, and we talked about the fact that portals provide a ton of autonomy. And there's been lots of conversations and good use cases yesterday that spoke about that. And I would back that. I think portals are getting so much attention today because of that usability aspect, that desire to pull things together and be able to make them something that individuals can use easily. The second side of operability is that extensibility, that idea of empowering the operations, not just BAU, but extending. And that talk spoke about the fact that not every user wants the same thing. So I was just saying, sometimes you don't care about power user aspects of the interface. You just want it to be simple. You just want to be able to see everything that you need to see. You don't want to have to worry about where to find hidden values and keyboard shortcuts. And this is because there isn't a one size fits all when it comes to interfaces and to users. We need to provide different interfaces for the right problem for the right user. And that was really the takeaway from this talk, is that whenever you talk about an interface, what it is it's providing that ability to get access to something that is powerful behind the scenes. And we introduced this framework, the idea of the API pig, which talks about the fact that everything driven by APIs enables the right interfaces to be made at the right time and to apply those over the top. So please check out the talk. That's what the QR code is for if you're interested in that. And we have some high hopes of writing up some more content, written content for accessibility online around that. So let me know if that would be helpful, and it might help us prioritize that. The last piece, and I've left this to last because maintainability is a thing most people attribute to operability anyways, is the workhorse of operability in reality. And there's two key things I want to call out about maintainability because there's so many aspects. The first is to make something maintainable, you have to know who is maintaining it, who owns what. And this is where I love that we're starting to talk in platform engineering about interfaces between the platform and the users and being thoughtful about those interfaces. Just yesterday, Victor gave a talk about how he's doing that with crossplane and port, and he was showing how the interface to his claim allowed the user to set the size and the version of the database. This means, to me, that the user is in charge of upgrading that database because the user was allowed to set the version of that database. If a security flaw comes about in that version 16.2 and it needs to be fixed, users will need to go and understand that and bump that version. There are other customers I'm seeing today as I work with them with Cradix, they're deciding not to expose the patch versions of databases as an option in their interface to customers. Yes, customers want, as in software developers, need to know what version of Postgres they're running. But what they don't need is to be involved in the security patching. And so the operations team is setting the interface to be clear on who owns what side of the maintenance of that platform. The second piece I want to call out is the idea of making the right thing easy to do, the easy thing to do. And this is about when you do hand over some of that maintainability aspect to users, or you own more and more of that on the platform team. I hear more and more stress from platform engineers about the cognitive load falling to them. You need to have doing the right thing be easy. So when we talk about the fact that there's a number of different interface types that are required to be able to service an entire organization of diverse users, you might need web portals, you might need CLI tools, you might need chatbots. What does it look like to keep these in line? And again, going back to yesterday's talk and to some of the other conversations in the industry, being able to derive the fields within that user interface is a fantastic new feature from Port, that ability to read those from that Kubernetes CRD, because all of a sudden you can keep these different interfaces up to date. But one of the things that I know was part of the wish list, and I would like to just double down on a wish list for, is this idea of being able to configure the pieces. There was still a lot of configuration required once the fields got pulled in, right? Well, what would happen if you needed to be able to change what fields got displayed in which UI, or what the names of those fields would be? How would you do that through that API? What would we look to do for interface configuration? This is where I think you need to be looking at your platform orchestrator. It's not about, this is again, not about portals versus platforms, but about how they collaborate together to make for operability. If your portal is orchestratable through API calls and declarative code, which they are getting better and better about, and you can see that with the port work that's being done, how do you actually connect the API schema with its UI in such a way that when you make a change to the schema, you can make an atomic change that is reflected in the interfaces for those users without having to go in and make manual changes? This is the brains of your platform, the brains of your interfaces, and this is what you should be looking at your orchestrator to be able to manage. So that's my wish list from the industry, and it's something that I'm helping to implement and think is really powerful. So in conclusion, what we're talking about is that platform engineering is going to rise and fall on business value just like any other technology. You look at the kind of disappearance of blockchain, and that's in large part because people were having a hard time connecting it to business value. Let's make sure platform engineering doesn't fall to the same fate. We should stop having debates over what implementation we need first or last, or in more depth or in less depth. What we need to focus on is what is the way we can connect with our users, the way we can connect value to our business, and in particular, how these technologies can actually collaborate and make the sum of their parts even greater than those parts. And finally, operability needs to be on the forefront of everyone's mind when they're talking about software in general, let alone platforms, which are often underpinning decades and decades of a company's progression. So when you think about usability, think about the fact that driving adoption and supporting that adoption over time is going to become more sustainable with the more usable that it is, and therefore your operations will be less expensive. And second, let's think about extensibility. We aren't just here to make a piece of software and walk away from it and just worry about BAU. We want to be continuing to iterate on and make value from that software. And finally, maintainability is a key tenet of operability, and we need to focus on that value creation that rather than on the BAU work that we have. So that is all I have for you today on talking about platform engineering, portals and platforms as two peas in a pod to look at operability.
So we're opening for questions. If anybody has any questions, although you've been so peaceful in the portals versus platforms, that maybe no one will ask questions because you've any answer is right. Where do you see anti-patterns in terms of either operability or maintainability? So if we go back to the Victor example, putting up a parameter, which I actually should not operate in my self-service if I'm a developer that is not supposed to address that parameter.
Yeah. Sorry, I thought there was be more. I do think one of the anti-patterns is around like the tweaks that we saw in that, right? Because there's tweaks is obvious. You're not going to have the exact same experience in a portal as you will in a CLI. That's the whole point, is you're addressing a different part of your user base, a different use case. But you want those tweaks to be done in such a way that they almost flow through that system and they're not just a stopgap. And to the point that you're making about what you actually expose to those users, what users need is read only as information that they care about versus what they should be taking actions on can be two different things. And I think that as low level technologists that we are, often coming from the infrastructure and operational side of the fence that come into platform engineering, we love the details. Oh, get us into the technology, get us into those details, and we just think everyone cares about that. And the thing is most technologists do, most engineers do care about the details, but it's which details. If you go and you speak to a React.js dev or a front end designer who's working in CSS and styles and things like that, they are crazy detailed about that aspect. But they don't care about that test environment. They just want it up and running where they can press refresh and see their changes. So what we think is cool and interesting from our side, we need to be aware is not always what is cool and interesting from the user side, and we need to think deeply about those interfaces.
And can you provide some examples of maintainability issues in platforms that you've seen?
Absolutely. I think the number one that I always see is the security patching. I mean, the amount of fire coming out of people's heads when things happen where a 0-day is exposed, of where are we using this? What is going on? What risks do we have? How fast can we update this? All of those aspects of where can you find the problem and how can you roll that problem out and how can you roll it out safely is things that organizations are at different maturity levels, we'll say, over time. And so I think that's a maintainability headache that is really big, just even just knowing where your software is at and how to update it. So one of my favorite little tricks and hacks is I run every CI/CD pipeline in an organization I'm a part of or that I have access to on a regular basis, typically weekly, sometimes fortnightly, always during the business day. And the idea behind this is even if it's completely ignored, it breaks, it's a tree falling in the forest and no one's listening to if it made a sound. It means that if you have to come through and you have to do a fix in that repository 6 months down the line, a year down the line, you know when that started breaking and you can go and research what was happening at that point. Maybe there's a package that didn't get pinned and the upgrade broke things or whatever, rather than being at a loss because you have a year's worth of time trying to figure out, what's happening here. Is what broke? Why? How? When?
Good, good. And one last question. You're inviting people to the platform working group, which you're a co-chair of.
Yes.
What does that require of them?
Participation would be great, but just engagement and awareness is even fantastic. There's a website where we publish blog posts that are getting more and more regular. So just paying attention to those, making comments on those is great. The working group mostly works in an asynchronous way through Slack, through the CNCF Slack in WG-platforms channel. But we do also have calls twice a month. I couldn't do twice a week. Twice a month. I think second and fourth Tuesdays of the month. And so we just had one this week and we'll be up and again in 2 weeks. And you can join those calls and we end up talking a little bit of business. So what are we working on and what can you get involved with if you have the time and energy? We always try and set aside time for conversation. So this week we spoke about the Gartner hype cycle and how that related to our organizations and our network. And we also spoke a bit about that blog post that I shared the diagram from. So lots of really interesting conversations to be had.
Great. So thank you, Abby. And we'll take a short break and then we'll have our next session.
Thank you
Goodbye.
so much.
Thank you.